Welcome to the MacroAgility Client Journey series. In this episode, we explore how MacroAgility helped Runwell Solutions lead a complex iManage cloud migration, involving tens of thousands of workspaces and millions of documents. With Uplift migration and SyncTools, MacroAgility delivered greater control and helped position Runwell for future migrations with more confidence.
Hi, Julio. Welcome.
Hello.
Thank you so much again, Julio, for joining us. Such a great vibe with, since you've been working with us, there's lots of really good conversations happening about the work that is being done, the coordination between your teams and our teams as well. And I know it's busy and you're taking time out for us. So appreciate that.
No problem. It's been working in Oman and your team has been a fantastic experience from start to end. So I'm more than happy to help get the word out because we've been very happy with our experience with you guys.
So I also wanted to know just a little bit of brief overview of your company, your role, and then we'll get into the specifics.
So, we're an MSP that services clients in the Southeast Pennsylvania region out towards Harrisburg and obviously in and around Reading. And, we have clients in through, Philadelphia and into Jersey. So we service the region. As an MSP, we do basically end-to-end IT services for small to mid-sized companies. My job role here is the project team lead. So what I do is I work on a lot of projects, doing a lot of the design, architecture, and implementation for projects, looking at and a lot of that is iManage focused. We have a number of our clients are law firms that use iManage, so there's a need there. And so, a lot of my time is focused on iManage projects, but also do other things like Azure and virtual environments and things of that nature.
Thank you for giving us that overview.
No, that's no problem. So when we first approached MacroAgility, we had a project that we were going from an on-prem migration of iManage to the cloud. And recently we had done several of these. And we had used a different tool set. And we always wound up running into issues. The tool set was, there was a lot of, I'm not trying to disparage any other company, the support was very good but the tool set was just not there. It required a lot of manual hands-on, SQL queries and fiddling and just a lot of, some things that would migrate incorrectly, which would cause pain points in the post-migration period. You undertake this massive, project, this undertaking of moving an entire on-prem iManage to their cloud, and that it often involves, as we were talking, like we have law firm clients. So we were talking thousands of matters, workspaces, millions of documents, most of the time. And you need to have all those pieces working in sync together. Because if one piece starts to have problems in the client's mind, then this migration is not going well, right? And they from a client's perspective, they're expecting this to, they're paying the money and they want it to go well and they want it to have minimal interruption, right? So just too many problems, too much time spent in the post migration period fixing things that were not done correctly, but that we expected and were sold on by the tool. And so when we came time for this project, I had spoken with our CEO and I said, I want to look at other options. And I was investigating. I reached out to a couple of vendors. Yeah, MacroAgility was one of them. I just did a Google search. I was Googling products that did, cloud iManage cloud migrations. And then your product came up a few times. I think iManage on their site mentioned MacroAgility. Your MacroAgility just came up in my Google search on the first page. And when I was looking through your webpage, the functionality and everything that was laid out there seemed exactly what I needed, but I wanted to get a hands-on and talk to someone, which you folks provided beautifully. You were very quick in, responding to me and very timely. There was follow-up, there was interest. You actually, it started off great because you wanted to actually, reach out, answer my questions, and set up a time pretty quickly. I think it was you, Phil. I can't remember if it was you specifically, but
That was
you.
me.
So yeah, you can't gotten back to me within like a day or so. You're, let's set something up. What are your questions? By the time I heard back from the other vendor, we were already signed with MacroAgility and had started working on the project. Just to give you an idea. It started out awesome, and it only got better, so that's how I feel.
Love that. That really gives us an idea for sure. Can you talk about what were you migrating from and what were you migrating to?
Yeah, so for the original project that we reached out to you folks, it was from on-prem iManage, an on-prem infrastructure to their cloud iManage.
What was making this migration complex or risky in comparison to any other typical moves that you'd be making?
So I mean, the size, this is a client that we had, taken on not too long ago, and there was a lot of change and a lot of moving parts with that project. So I wanted to, for me, and I mean for us, we wanted to try to ensure that this would go as seamless as possible. We didn't want to run into some of the headaches and roadblocks that we had experienced before with other migrations with other tools, right? So we wanted to, we're moving, I don't know, something like 40, I can't tell you how many, like it was like 40, 50,000 plus workspaces. We're talking like, a few million documents, and getting all that, especially ready, when we do our cutover, we're doing it over a weekend. So we got to make sure that everything's staged and prepared, and that we can cut over with a lot of ease of mind in that time period. So we just wanted to make sure that it was going to go as smoothly as we could make it for our client.
For sure. With that amount of data set, I can totally imagine what was not working before. And was there something that you were trying to solve internally?
We had used this previous tool across 3 or 4 different migrations. And, when you're brand new to a tool, you take what you learn and you apply it to the next thing, right? So that it goes a little smoother, you hope, and that there's less issues. And it just felt like when we would apply those lessons learned, there'd be other things that would be a problem come up. And it got to the point where, the last one I just felt burned based on, when I had my first conversation, when you folks did the sales call where you show me the product, you answer my questions. One of the questions I had was, does this product migrate the search folders without issue? Because I can't tell you how frustrating and annoying it is to migrate, you know, thousands and thousands of matters with, a ton of documents, and your user go in and they use their search folders that are built into iManage and they don't work. We configure our matters to always have 2 search folders, one that shows the entire contents of that matter. So if they want to just look at it in one screen, it shows them everything. And then one that shows them like the last, recent activity, the last X amount of days, right? So users were going into the one that showed the entire, workspace, and there'd be nothing there. So in their minds, they're panicking right off the bat. Files are missing, content's missing, what's going on? And, troubleshooting that issue is like, no, all the documents are there. It's just that the properties of this search folder did not come over properly from the on-prem to the cloud. So I think that was one of the first things I asked Numan, and he was very adamant and very clear about. No, that is something we had that issue. We early on we figured out that being an issue, and we solved it, and we don't have that problem. And I got to tell you, that was a relief because it bore out like it. Didn't hear one complaint or issue with search folders and matters when they migrated to the cloud, and that's just a small piece, but when it's all the small pieces and the big pieces work right off the bat, it's just such a relief.
Yeah, that is pretty significant actually. And let's talk a little bit about users and teams that were how many would you say approximately were being affected during this process?
I would say probably about, I wanna say 180 to 100 users,
Just going into this project, what did the success look like for you?
For me, success would have been we got everything up to the cloud, and without any major issues without the user noticing I'm missing all of X, Y, and Z, or some things like search folders aren't working, or things along that line. One of the things that was really impressed me in my initial call in the sales call was, outside poor Numan must have been wondering like, why am I asking so many questions? And I was like, I'm like jaded and bitter, from previous experience. And I said I had asked about the search folders because I was real adamant about that working. And I had said, what is what is the rate of success that you I don't want to say guarantee, but the previous vendors that I worked with were like, we only guarantee that about 85 to 90% of your documents are going to make it up, roughly. That it's not going to be 100%. And 80 to 90, 10 to 15%, is a lot especially if you have a large document libraries. And second, it's kind of a strange ask to, in my opinion, to go to a client and say, hey, look, we're going to bring up your documents to the cloud. We're probably not going to get 8 to 10% of them. You're just going to have to let them go. Like, that's just not a conversation you have. You know what I mean? So, Naman was again, very calm and cool, and, it was very wonderful to talk to. And he was like, no, we bring everything over. Like it wasn't even a question. It was almost like I felt like I was being strange and bringing it up because I'm like, oh, I guess most people just expect everything to come up. Like that's what I would have expected.
Was there a moment during the project where something did not go as planned, and how was it resolved?
Yes, there was. I will take the blame. We started running into some issues that we were seeing because I didn't perform this step. And we had a call. We were on this call for like 45 minutes. And yeah, again, Numan is the person I spoke to like 99% of the time. So I'm not trying to like give Numan all the credit. I'm just going to give him most of the credit because he's the guy I worked with the most. But he said, well, when you were doing the set this up and did you run this doc command that we have to push out the number? It's like just a technical thing that would push out, the number, the document numbers that would be assigned. And I was on video, and I was like, I felt foolish, and I had to tell him, "No, I did not." And there was a pause, and then he went right to providing a solution. And I just really appreciated, that he was so calm and cool about it, and he was very, supportive, after the fact. Like, "No, no, no, this is everybody makes mistakes. Look, I make mistakes. I just," and gave an experience that happened to him. So it was just, it didn't go as planned. We were running into some errors. It was my fault, and we resolved it with your tool again was robust enough that it allowed us to work around it with relative ease.
Out of all of this, what was the most helpful part during this entire implementation?
The communication and responsiveness was huge. So I'll give you an example. All that in the project, the communication, responsiveness, and help, right? Which led to then when we had our project after our first one, where I had a situation where I needed a tool that was going to allow us to update permissions or matters and workspaces quickly. And, it was a discovery it made as a something that happened in the project. And we found ourselves kind of a tight time frame to correct it. So, I reached out to iManage support, wanted to do one thing. And I said, I was talking with our CEO. I said, I'm going to hedge my bets and I'm going to reach out to MacroAgility and see if they also have this, like something that'll do this. So, of course, you did have a tool that did it, the SyncTools, explained how it worked, and and you got us the licensing and all that like within less than a day, right? By the time everything was all said and done, the next morning, I worked with some of your engineers and we got it installed. And then when we started running, I got a quick crash course in it, and then we used it, and by the end of that day, we were where we needed to be. We had resolved the permissions issues that we had. So I say all this to say that when I went to my CEO and I told him MacroAgility has this tool, we ran these tests, dude, it worked, like it worked great. I'll paraphrase his words. He's like, oh my God, thank God for MacroAgility. Like the relief of having fixed that situation with the speed and timeliness, it was, Well, I told him, "Hey, here's the cost," and it wasn't like very much, for the tool. He was like, "Spend it, just get it." And then like it was totally worth it. Oh my God. That's his takeaway. And that's, that he's hearing and experiencing because I'm always giving him the feedback from my experience with you folks. And if it's making him released, that's a huge win on my part.
If you had to quantify time saved compared to using any native iManage tools or anything that you've used in the past, what would be your estimate?
Going back to kind of the main one, which is the on-prem to cloud migration. I mean, we're talking easily, in my estimation, I feel 40 to 50 hours, and that might be underselling it. And I say that because the whole process, right? The setting up the pre-migration tasks, getting all that set up was super, super straightforward, easy. Staging this, the documents, getting them uploaded to the cloud. I mean, I think the biggest time saver was we finished the migration, and there's always cleanup and there's always work that has to happen, right? Like, you do a migration and then you're going through and going, okay, what was missed, or what errored out, what needs to be fixed, right? Because no project, no matter what you do, it can be 100%. The time saved from not having to go back and fix things like the search folders, not having to go back and find documents that were missing. I mean, the way MacroAgility's Uplift, accounts for every document, accounts for the errors, and gives you a way both graphically and in SQL if you really want to kind of roll up your sleeves and work in there, is super time saving. So just the fact that there was minimal post migration cleanup that needed to be done was huge, and it was quite the change from our previous experiences.
So, would you describe this as a tactical fix or a strategic improvement to how you handle migrations moving forward? And how did this engagement change your confidence in handling any future migrations as well?
Combining both of these, absolutely a strategic improvement. This is the tool we're going to use. We have already lined up a cloud iManage migration, similar product migration, on-prem iManage to cloud iManage for a client later this year. And we're going to be using Uplift, your Uplift tool for that. How to change my confidence? Well, this is a little getting a little vulnerable. I was having a conversation a few months ago, and I had had such a bad enough experiences, or I felt rattled enough that I actually was talking with my CEO, and I was like, I don't know that I necessarily want to do any more migrations, like on-prem to cloud. I feel like we run into issues. I do everything I can, and I'm, you learn from the product that we've been using, but I feel like it doesn't apply then to subsequent migrations. And it was just a very high stress level and frustration factor for me personally, that I was feeling really a certain way about if we wanted to just outsource migrations. And, we were talking about so we had two, and one was from not iManage. It was like from another product coming up. And then one was an on-prem. And I said, let me look, because he asked me, he's like, are you sure you want to outsource this? And I said, well, let me look. I looked, researched. That's when I reached out to MacroAgility, right? And the other companies. And you actually got back to me. And I gotta tell you, the process and experience gave me a full confidence boost that we can absolutely do this again. I am not worried about doing it again. I'm not concerned. I don't have the same anxiety concerns because the experience was so good. The tool is so good. The support is so good that it completely changed my demeanor and confidence level in doing it again.
Continuing on this momentum, anything you want to add that we haven't covered to have you describe this experience working with us in one sentence?
I would say that macro agility empowered us to deliver great service for our client. I've been here for over 10 years, and this is, I think, the first time I've ever felt compelled when asked to actually partake in this. So I think it speaks a lot to the value and the quality of your team and your products.
Thank you so much, Julio, for your time.
To learn more about MacroAgility's iSyncKit and iManage support solutions, visit macroagility.com.